Hello there. Welcome to the Saroid channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And go and get yourself that sparkling drink, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Gladys, my aunt, was physically scared. She was shaking like a leaf, her pale blue eyes twinkling with an angst I'd never discerned before. Gladys was a proud, reserved woman who didn't easily show her emotions, as growing up her parents had taught her that revealing your feelings about things was a grievous weakness, so keeping a stoic, stiff upper lip was the dignified way for a lady to conduct herself. Gladys was now in her late 70s. Not a day had gone by in her life that she had been afraid of anything, until now. She was unable to disguise the trepidation on her face, as on this specific occasion it seemed that fear had torn away the mask, like the tinfoil on a ready meal, to expose the fragile vulnerableness that lay beneath. She had been married to her husband Walter for over 50 years. Walter was a scientist who had worked from home in a laboratory that had been built in close proximity to their farmhouse. In truth, it looked exactly like the house, remarkably similar, with the idea in mind that it could be later converted into a cottage when the property was one day sold. My Uncle Walter had funded his own research from a generous inheritance that he had procured from his wealthy, affluent father. Ostensibly, he made some prodigious breakthroughs in medicine. Much of his phenomenal research was suppressed, censored and repressed, as some of his preeminent findings would not make the kind of sizable money that Big Pharma was interested in acquiring, as there's an astonishing amount of money being made out of cancer and other diseases. By all accounts, in America alone, one person with cancer makes the medical profession easily over $70,000 and possibly more. It's a hell of a lot of money that they're not eager to lose. And if you find a cheap cure to any disease, it's likely to be clandestinely concealed, as well as the information being heavily sequestered and confidentially hidden, as it fails abysmally in complementing Big Pharma's nefarious money-making agenda. The problem with cures from nature is they can't be patented, so no sizable money can be made from natural cures. This happened once when scientists were unravelling the cancer curative properties discovered in the custard apple that could not be recreated synthetically in the laboratory, so the studies on the custard apple came to an immediate halt, despite the vast fortunes spent on the research, as the scientists could not recreate a successful acclaimed alternative. My uncle had learnt of alternative healthcare practitioners who had stumbled on breakthroughs in cancer, heart disease and diabetes, suddenly being found dead in their homes, in precarious, incredulous situations that left you wondering if their deaths were accidental at all. My uncle had told Gladys that he could not discuss his scientific findings with her, as he didn't want to put her life in perilous danger, which could ultimately happen if she knew too much. He told her that one day she might find him lying dead in an inexplicable situation, and if that were indeed the case, she would know that it was not a fortuitous accident. "Just so you know, Gladys," he had said, "I would never willingly take my own life." Gladys's story. My husband Walter adored science. His research was absolutely phenomenal. I was exceedingly proud of him as my husband. He couldn't be bought, bribed or manipulated by large medical organisations looking to become exceedingly wealthy. Walter had a desire in his heart to do great good by humanity. He was a brilliant man, but refused to discuss any of his findings with me in order to protect me. My husband would spend long hours during the day. He'd work for absolute ages in his laboratory, testing, experimenting and examining his findings under his microscope, often growing all kinds of strange cultures, substances and bacteria in petri dishes. If you walked into his laboratory, you would quite simply marvel at this Aladdin's cave of mystery and intrigue. My husband had animal parts like hearts and eyeballs pickled in brine. He had bottles and bottles of strange medical concoctions on shelves with very long scientific names. I remember one night he invited a scientist he regarded as a good friend to come and see something incredible he had discovered in his research. a clandestine secret that could potentially offer groundbreaking cures in some diseases. I'd never seen my husband so excited before, so I knew without a shadow of a doubt he had uncovered some kind of medical breakthrough. But what, I couldn't imagine. It seemed he had treated his sick mice with something. They had recovered and regained their health. In my husband's book, this was quite simply a momentous miracle. Even the most poorly mouse, hovering over the threshold of death by a fine silvery thread, had overcome death itself and was now robustly healthy. When my husband was feverishly stirred with enthusiasm, it would literally make me smile every time, inwardly and outwardly. I couldn't help myself. It would give me a thrill. My husband had what I called a happy walk, which involved him pacing up and down the house, rubbing his hands in glee, pursing his lips together in an ebullient, contented expression. "Oh, Gladys," he said to me with a massive grin on his face, "I've made a huge breakthrough. I wish I could tell you about it, but I can't." He told me he had called his scientist friend George around to observe the outstanding findings. When he said that, my heart literally sank. I didn't have a good feeling about this. I mean, how did he know he could trust George, whom he was calling around to our home? I had my distinct reservations. I mean, he didn't know the man very well. Supposingly he had been bought out by Big Pharma, blackmailed, bribed, and even personally threatened. This was my grievous concern. You see, big money talks. Some people will stop at nothing to ensure that cheaper breakthroughs in medicine don't get spilled out to the public. And if they do, they'll be booed by the media, so people will believe they can't be trusted. They'll go so far as they need to enforce their will, even if it means snuffing out the threat. I know many people will not believe that this sort of insidious stuff actually goes on in the world today, or that humanity can be this depraved. But believe me, the power of money can serve some duplicitous agendas and wicked motives, especially when controlled by powerful organisations and people that are swift to want to crush small businesses and entrepreneurial enterprises, not to mention the creative spirit within each and every one of us. And they can when they have lots of money. I begged Walter not to show any of his research to the scientist friend of his, George, in case they got leaked to Big Pharma, as we knew nothing about this man. Well, not really. "Please, Walter, don't show him any of your findings, unless you're 100% sure you can trust him." "I'm reasonably sure I can trust him." "Reasonably sure, Walter? That's not good enough, not by a long shot. Surely you of all people realise this. You're a great scientist, but you know what your problem is? You have too much of a trusting heart. You may be savvy and intuitive when it comes to your work, but by golly, you lack that same perception when it comes to people. You're not always the best judge of character. You could have got George horribly wrong, and if you have, you stand the great chance of putting your life in danger. You know we have to be scrupulously careful about who we trust." "Well, I married you, did I not, Gladys? I think that makes me an exceptionally good judge of character. I tell you what, when I bring the scientist into the house for a cup of tea, and if you give me the wink, I'll know that I have your approval to show him my breakthrough discovery. But if you scratch your nose and touch your chin, I won't show him a thing." "You promise?" I ask him. "I promise," he assures me. I don't feel confident about my husband undertaking to make a solemn promise. It's no more reassuring than linking our pinky fingers together and making a pinky promise. It's not that I don't trust my husband to honour his troth, as Walter is a man of integrity and principle. What I don't trust is his ebullient enthusiasm that may be painstakingly difficult to restrain. Rather like an excitable dog on a lead, desperate to meet another dog. He pulls so hard, he breaks free, darting over to the other dog, believing he's going to be received enthusiastically. The worst part of it all is there's not a thing you can do to stop him. Supposing the dog is a dangerous predator that rips and tears him to pieces. But Walter doesn't think about those kind of ramifications or choices, even when he's mindfully aware of the risks that they might engage. It's like he's always in denial. This is what Walter is like in a room of scientists when he's spending time with people who speak his kind of language, possessing a similar passion. In my experience, scientists are often zealous about their innovative, pioneering work. And why not? Wouldn't you be excited if you found something that had the capacity to change people's lives for the better? I know my husband is bursting at the seams to tell anyone about his quantum leap in the world of science, most especially a fellow accomplished scientist like himself, who can truly appreciate his incredulous discovery. But to what end? That's what I ask you. Understandably, it's got to be exceedingly difficult to suppress something you're hankering to share with the entire world that you know could potentially save lives, and lots of them. I'd seen my husband during his weaker moments, when his mouth had actually twitched. I had discerned him being on the threshold of surrendering some of his revolutionary scientific secrets to me, which I certainly didn't want to hear about, for the dangers they represented to my life. I'm glad to convey his desire to protect me, always overrid his ardent earnestness to spill the beans on some of his phenomenal discoveries. I've seen him bite his lip, reach out for an apple to eat in order to prevent himself from talking, so I'm not certain my husband has any willpower whatsoever to abstain from sharing his findings with a man with an innovative scientific mind like his own, who lives and breathes science like he does. The scientist called George promptly arrives at our home in a smart dark green gleaming Jaguar with expensive white leather seats. I ascertain he's got lots of money, not always a positive sign in a scientist, as he could be being bought by large corporations. When he climbs out of his vehicle, walking towards our front door, I welcome him into the threshold of our home warmly. He doesn't reciprocate my open friendliness at all. On the contrary, he appears rather cold, aloof, and indifferent towards me, as if I'm a lower form of pond life, not worthy of his attentive, polite consideration. I wonder to myself if he treats his poor wife with such indifference, disregard, and contempt. It's more than a little likely, I think. "Hello," he says. "You must be Walter's wife, Gladys." I observe that he appears as interested in me as a honeybee is in a can of sugarless cola. I notice he evades my eyes or any form of eye contact with me, which I find distinctly unsettling, rather shifty, and undisputingly rude. When I shake his handshake is limp, wet, and clammy, not pleasant at all. Everything about this enigmatic character is sounding loud warning bells in my head. I discern that George's expression changes dramatically when my husband enters the room. His demeanour shifts, his smile widens broadly. He slaps Walter on the back and says, "Good to see you, old man. It's been quite a while. I'd like to hear about what you've been getting up to on the science side of things. Any medical breakthroughs yet?" "It's good to see you too," says my husband in response. I bring in the tea on a silver tray. My hands are wobbling unsteadily and shaking, so that all the china cutlery rattles. I've already firmly decided that there is something distinctly off about this slippery character. I have this horrible gut feeling he may have been bought by Big Pharma. I put the tray on the large coffee table, along with a plate piled high with my homemade chocolate brownies. But the two men don't even notice me, despite my best efforts to get their undivided attention. But at this point I could throw a brick at the window, scream like a banshee at the top of my voice, or dance around the living room completely naked, and they're unlikely to even notice me. "Would you like some tea?" I say to George. Regretfully, both my husband and George fail to respond. They're so wrapped up in an animated conversation together that despite my very best efforts, it's as if I'm not even there in the room with them. This is not a new experience for me. I've learnt not to take offence, as scientists can behave like this when they're caught up in discussing scientific findings. Well, I've found that with Walter over the years. There are times he's been so absorbed and enthrallingly preoccupied in a project that he's even forgotten to eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. And on occasions when he's worked so solidly, for 2 days at a stretch, I found him lying crashed out on his sofa in his laboratory, finally having surrendered to sleep, after even the copious amounts of coffee have failed to keep him awake. Sometimes I don't mind admitting that I've envied his passion. I enjoy reading books, but never once has a book held my attention so much that I've forgotten to eat. I wish that would invariably happen. I might actually lose a couple of pounds, as I could do with missing a meal or two. I realise in that moment that the scratching of the nose and the touching of the chin to dissuade my husband from revealing his scientific discoveries to George is invariably not going to happen. Both men are just not giving me the time of day. "Walter," I say, but he just isn't listening. I would have to pour a bucket of ice-cold water over his head to actually get his attention. And even in my book, That's going way too far. Walter looks up at me for a brief moment very vaguely. I scratch my nose, touching my chin frantically, with an exaggerated pronunciation, but to no avail. My husband turns away from me. He continues his deep conversation with George. It's as if he's looking right through me, like a pane of glass, that he failed to actually see me. I know you might think my husband is being awfully rude towards me, but not at all. You have to fully appreciate his zealous passion for what he does. I watch both men gliding past me as Walter leads the way through our living room. He pushes open our sliding doors that open out onto a patio, and then he trails down the sandstone steps. They trudge towards the open front door of the laboratory, where they finally both disappear from my sight. The brownies and tea remain untouched. I know that nothing is going to stop Walter unleashing the cat out of the bag to the scientist called George. I can only hope he's not in cahoots with the dark side, but then you can never be sure about that. It's on a Friday night that I'm lying in bed, 3 days after my husband's rendezvous with George, who he admitted having shown him the results of his scientific research. "Why did you tell him?" I chide. "I kept scratching my nose, touching my chin, warning you off the man when he came to visit us, but you paid me absolutely no attention." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I never saw you." "You're right about that, Walter," I exclaim. "It was like you looked right through me. I hope for your sake, Walter, that he doesn't work for the dark side, because if he does, we could be in a whole heap of trouble. Our lives could be in danger." "I'm sure he doesn't," said my husband. "He seems like a very nice man." "I'm sure people can be nice, especially the dark ones, when they have a nefarious agenda of some sort. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to win over the confidence of men like you." "Don't be like that, sweetheart. I'm sure we can trust him. Needless to say, I have to tell you, he was very blown away by my research. Excited about it, much like I am." "I hope you're right, Walter," I said, pulling the bedspread over my shoulders and going to sleep. I awake during the night to hear a loud clanging sound that arouses my attention. I sit up in bed with a start. In truth, it sounds like a couple of rambunctious, clumsy raccoons have tipped over our dustbin in the front yard. The noise reminds me of a wheelie bin being flung on its side. This is not unusual for our household. I've heard that familiar sound many times before, although tonight it's louder than usual. Walter groans. "Those goddamned raccoons! Heaven help us!" he exclaims. "If I don't go and sort the bins out, those raccoons will scatter so much mess all over our yard. I better go and fix the lids down tightly." My husband reaches for his tartan red and green dressing gown. He ties the cord around his middle. He slips into his slippers. "I won't be long, sweetheart," he whispers. I hear him trudging down the staircase, muttering under his breath about those bloody raccoons. I grunt because I'm sleeping, sliding back comfortably into my bed. I do hear some more bangs and crashes, but think nothing of it. Not even when I hear my husband saying, "Oh no! Oh no!" I assume he's appalled by the mess made by the raccoons. They're probably tin cans, leftover potato peelings, empty yogurt containers sprawled all over the front yard. Not a pretty sight. I slip off to sleep. I don't awaken until 8:30 the following morning, when the sunlight is filtering through a crack in our bedroom window. I glance briefly at my husband's side of the bed, but he's not there. He must have got up early, I think. I don't hear any sounds of Walter banging around in the kitchen, putting the coffee on, something he would always do, as for him making coffee in the morning is a matter of routine. It helps us to wake up with a surge of caffeine swimming in our systems. I climb out of bed somewhat reluctantly, my eyes still filled with particles of sleep. I really don't want to get up right now. My tangled grey hair is hanging around my face like wilting grey curtains. I place on my dressing gown. I potter down our ornate oakwood sweeping staircase towards our classical French-style kitchen. But I'm bewildered not to smell the familiar scent of coffee perforating the air with its aromatic bouquet. The kitchen remains undisturbed. It's remarkably quiet, apart from our cat Minxie crunching pellets hungrily on the kitchen counter. He looks up at me and purrs while he continues to eat. How can he purr and eat at the same time? That's something I've never understood. I stroke his silken soft grey fur, very lovingly, and say, "Where is your daddy this morning, Minxie?" My cat rubs his face affectionately against my chest, purring profusely. The soft sunlight filters through the windows, casting its twinkling shafts over the gleaming white quartz surfaces that sparkle in the morning light. My husband has made no coffee this morning, which is exceedingly odd, most unusual. The kitchen is far too clean. There's not a dirty coffee mug in sight. It looks the way I left it the night before. I glance out of the kitchen window. It is without doubt a magnificently beautiful day. It's early summer. The meadows sprawling out before me are viridescently green. The wooden picket fence that separates our yard, bordering our neighbour's field, where some of their black and bay American quarter horses are happily frolicking away, sparkles under the golden glaze of the morning light. The grass literally gleams under the carpets of moist dewdrops. Where the heck is my husband, I wonder? There's a strange ominous feeling that is nudging me, like a stranger in a shop tapping me on the shoulders to get my attention. The nudge feels cold, bodeful, inauspicious. It's a feeling that I refuse to accommodate. I just can't afford to go there. Of course everything is all right, I tell myself firmly. I walk out of my kitchen back door, ambling towards my husband's laboratory. The door has been left wide open. I smile to myself. Maybe my husband got up bright and early to pursue some of his gripping scientific research. He must have a bee in his bonnet about something exciting he stumbled upon. I smile as I think about how exuberant he becomes when he's on the precipice of a breakthrough. Sometimes he can remind me of a boy at Christmas opening his Christmas stocking. Maybe that's why he's up and about so early, I think. I push the door open with my hands a little wider. I am completely scandalized by the chaotic shambles and disarray that greet my eyes. My husband's laboratory looks like it's faced a tsunami. A mishmash of bottles lies strewn haphazardly across the floor, all broken, with pickled eyeballs and hearts lying scattered over papers like blobs of jelly, or dead sea fish on the seashore. My eyes sweep across the disordered turmoil, and then I see them. It would appear that lying through this jumbled, dishevelled mess is a pair of legs in pyjama bottoms plunged under a debris of fallen files. The legs remain ominously still. They belong to my husband. I recognise the green and white striped material at once. The sterile laboratory is soundless. In the stillness I can hear my inward screams and shrieks that shatter the pretentious silence with the baleful sense of foreboding that shoots through my system like fireworks crackling in the night sky on the 4th of July. For a moment, all remains stationary, tranquil, strangely calm. I'm frozen to the spot like an ice statue at a hotel banquet, and then a squeaky voice that I barely recognise comes out of the back of my throat. "Walter? Walter? Are you all right?" Of course he's not all right. I know this in my gut, but I don't want to face the sombre inevitability or reality of what I absolutely know I will find. My husband does not answer me. His legs remain still on the floor. My guts begin to recoil in terror. I move circumspectly towards my husband, gingerly pulling off the hodgepodge of files that have concealed his body. I scream. The sound that comes out of the back of my throat is so discomposing that it even frightens me. I wouldn't know I was capable of making a sound like that, until now. My husband has a plastic bag tied over his head, and within the plastic bag, his dead face looks blue. His eyes are glazed open like a dead fish. I scream again. It takes a long while for me to gather my senses together, for there is no order in this chaos. I'm afraid the rest of that bleary, ambiguous, baleful day is all but a smoky, foggy haze in my memory that is so vague, so nebulously obscure, as my overwhelming grief seems to have vaporized so many of my recollections. It is like my mind is a spinning whirl of elliptical confusion, compounded by a convoluted fuliginous disbelief and an ineffable shock, as if all my thoughts have been tossed around like clothes in a spin-dryer. I do remember fleeting flashes of that day. The police, the ambulance, the flashing blue and red lights, the coroner's van, a policewoman calming me down with hot, sweet cups of tea, a doctor giving me tranquilizers, a policeman telling me it was all going to be all right. But how can anything be all right ever again? I hear one officer saying to another, The wife's in shock. Call her son, will you? My 40-year-old son arrives on the scene. He cradles me lovingly in his arms, kissing me on my hair, and like everyone else he assures me that everything's going to be all right. But his eyes are glistening with tears, his body shaking violently from the shock of losing his father so fortuitously. My son holds my hand in his. I think we're both giving each other strength. Officer Brown, the junior officer in charge of the case, sits down with his notepad and pen. Do you mind if I ask you some questions, ma'am? Can't you see my mother is in shock, officer? Says my son indignantly. Do you have to question her now? Can this not wait? Can you not see my mother is grieving? This has been a dreadful shock for her. We never expected my father to be lying dead, with a plastic bag over his head of all things. It's all right, I say. I want to find out what monster did this to my husband. Officer Terence Brown clears his throat. He's a young man in his 40s with a receding hairline, a kindly face, very big brown eyes. I can see he looks exceedingly uncomfortable. I imagine he never gets used to cross-examining grieving relatives, so I almost feel empathetic towards him. There's no easy way to say this, ma'am, but we found a suicide note lying next to the body, saying I'm sorry. It looks like your husband put a bag over his head to suffocate himself. Was your husband suffering from depression? Did he give you any indication that he was unhappy? I feel indignant. The angry blood passes through my veins like a steam train. I feel myself rising out of my foggy slumber, like a closed flower that suddenly perks up in a field under the first sprinkles of sunlight. I take offence at the officer's suggestion, as if someone has slapped me across my face with a cold hand. I need to defend Walter's corner. I know he'd never have committed suicide. Officer, this was not a suicide. My husband would never kill himself. Someone deliberately killed him. They made it look like a suicide. Walter warned me that if I ever found him lying dead in his laboratory, or anywhere else for that matter, I must know that someone else took his life on purpose. He promised me wholeheartedly, officer, that he'd never intentionally take his own life. On the contrary, my husband loved life. He was excited to get up every single day. He was passionate about his work. Sometimes he was so excited about his research, he would remind me of a boy at Christmas having received a toy train. He was the last person in the world who would willfully take his own life. The officer slouched back, visibly straightens to attention. Even the pencil in his hands that is taking notes is trembling slightly. I notice his brown eyes studying me curiously. You believe your husband's death was deliberately staged? He asks me. His voice sounds grave and sombre. Absolutely, I say. My mother's right, says my son Jason. Never in a million years, officer, would my father willingly take his own life. And the last thing he would ever do if he wanted to kill himself would be put a bag over his own head. My father was a scientist. There are easier, less obtrusive ways to kill yourself, you know. If you believe your husband's death was staged, Mrs. Call me Gladys, I say. I never stand on ceremony. Well, Gladys, could you tell me why you think anyone would willingly harm your husband? Why do you believe his death was staged? Did he have any enemies you know about? People like my husband always have enemies, officer. He is a private scientist working for himself. You see, my husband is an ethical, decent man, well, he was, who couldn't be bought, bribed or manipulated by major pharmaceutical organizations that are owned by the elite, who want to shut up the mouths of scientists and natural health practitioners that find cures for major diseases that are unlikely to make much money for them. You see, officer, there are people high up in our society who love money. They can't get enough of it. You know the saying, officer, from the Bible, whoever has money never has enough of it. Everything, officer, in this world of ours is dictated by money at the end of the day, as brutal as that may sound. And so many of us have been indoctrinated to believe that Big Pharma has all the answers to our health care, but that isn't necessarily true. That is what they want us to believe. There are natural ways people can be cured, but anything from nature cannot be patented, so it's not going to bring in the big bucks. That presents a major problem to the pharmaceutical industry. If you have a plethora of money, Officer Brown, your big money can be very useful in eliminating the bugging mosquitoes that represent a threat to the success of your industry. So what do you do to swat them? You exterminate them. My husband is like the irritating mosquito that they want to exterminate. I agree with you wholeheartedly, says Officer Brown. Everything in this world is about money. So many of the big businesses crush the small family-run businesses. It's grievously sad, very iniquitous. You see, it's happening all around the world. It happened to my parents' grocery business, so I know all about this. He pauses for a moment. If what you are saying is true, someone deliberately tried to kill your husband. Why now at this point in time, may I ask you? Officer, he stumbled on a breakthrough in kidney disease. I gleaned that much from him. I don't know the details. My husband chose to protect me from knowing too much. He said if I knew all about the breakthroughs, my life would be in perilous danger. I know the mice he was treating had dysfunctional kidneys. His medical breakthrough enabled the mice to regain perfect kidney health. Do you realise what an incredible breakthrough such a discovery is for medicine? It would seem 3 days ago he shared his findings with a scientist friend of his, whom he thought he could trust, a man called George McAvoy. I met the man. There was something shifty about him. I think he might be a whistleblower. He's working for the big guns behind Big Pharma. Don't you think it's suspicious, officer, that all my husband's files have been scattered all over the place, as if someone is searching for something? Whoever took Walter's life was possibly looking for his recent notes on his discoveries, so he could burn them up and destroy them. You see, Walter made physical notes, which he files away, as well as computer records. Needless to say, his computer has vanished. I ask you, officer, if my husband committed suicide, where is his computer? That's what I was saying to Officer Penrose, said Officer Brown, that this case does not bear the hallmark characteristics of a suicide at first glance. Someone turned the place upside down, as if they're searching for something of vital significance. No man who commits suicide goes turning his laboratory or home upside down. It's irrational, illogical, nonsensical to do, by all accounts. And it seems your husband is a fastidious man. I pointed out his neat, meticulous scientific notes that he had filed away. No one who is this meticulous messes up the place when committing suicide. I did search the premises for a computer, but there was none on site. So you're right about that. It appears to have vanished. A computer doesn't disappear after a suicide. That is another conundrum. I know Officer Penrose knows I'm right about this. He lowers his voice to a whisper. Even our police force can be infiltrated by the big guns behind major organizations, I'm afraid to say. Even they can be bought. I was saying to Officer Penrose, something is not right here. I watched him and the coroner exchange furtive glances together. Officer Penrose said to me, "This is an open and shut case. The man committed suicide. It's straightforward." The coroner agreed. But I observed some red marks on his hands that looked like he'd been cuffed when the bag had been tied over his head. I showed the red lines on his hand to the coroner. She said it was nothing, but that wasn't nothing. Someone tied up your husband's hands so that he couldn't remove the bag from his head. He told me I didn't need to interview you, Officer Penrose, that is. The case is not cut and dry. The moment I walked into the laboratory, I knew something smelt rank. In my opinion, ma'am, your husband's death was not a suicide. Thanks, I say, mopping my eyes. Thank you for believing me, Officer Brown. That means more than you'll ever know. The trouble is, ma'am, says Officer Brown, I can't go against my superior. I hope you appreciate that. If he and the coroner confirm your husband's death is a suicide, there is nothing I can do to persuade them to change their findings without risking losing my job. I have a family to feed, expensive school fees to pay. If I didn't, I would stick my neck on the line for you. But, madam, I'm sorry for your loss. I believe you. I believe your husband's death was not a suicide. So there we are. That's the end of part 1. because this is a very long story, so we're going to go on to part 2 tomorrow. And yes, it leads to a fabulous Bigfoot encounter. It sounds incongruous, but it really does. So until next time, goodbye and good night.